Welcome to Disciple Dojo. This series is going to be a little bit different. We're going to talk about Baal. Readers of the Bible, you see the name Baal, B-A-A-L, all the time. Some people say Baal. It's actually Baal in Hebrew. I'll say Baal or Baal just interchangeably, same thing. But he's one of those figures that you read about in the Bible, and it's just a name. So what I wanted to do in this series, and I don't know if this is going to be one video or a number of videos, we'll just see how long it takes. I want us to look at the actual Baal legend, sometimes called the Baal cycle or the Baal myth. But this is a collection of literature found on tablets in the city of Ugarit, which is north of Israel, written in Ugaritic, which is very, very similar to Hebrew. And so by looking at the Ugaritic Baal myth, my hope is that you see all of the resonances that the Old Testament authors pick up on and use throughout the Hebrew Bible. Understanding the background into which a text is written helps us better interpret the text. And Israel didn't exist in a vacuum. They existed in and among the Canaanites. And the Canaanites had their own beliefs, their own practices, their own religions. So we're going to just walk through the Baal myth and get an understanding of the story. And then hopefully that will help you as you're reading like the Psalms, the prophets, even Genesis and Exodus, to hear these echoes and these resonances. Now, there's a couple of resources I want to point out that may help you if this kind of study interests you. Firstly, there's my old professor, Jeff Niehaus. He has this, it's not a big book, it's fairly short, but it's by Kregel Publishing, and it's Ancient Near Eastern Themes in Biblical Theology. And it starts with a chapter on how to approach biblical parallels in the ancient Near East. And then it talks about different themes that occur both in Hebrew literature and in pagan literature. Another one that's great, I've talked about here on the channel, is John Currid's book, Against the Gods, Polemical Theology of the Old Testament. And what Currid does is he notes all of these parallels that you find in the Hebrew Bible and how they incorporate different ancient Near East ideas for the purpose of polemic, for the purpose of arguing against those or undercutting them. So both of these together are a great place to start when you're wanting to figure out, okay, what do we do with these ancient Near East parallels that we see in the literature of the world around Israel during Old Testament times? Now, for the actual texts themselves, if you want to read some of these accounts, there's a couple of collections. Now, this one is from EBS, which is Encountering Biblical Studies. And it's just readings from the ancient Near East. And it has all of these, not all, but a lot of ancient text in sort of modern translations, not super technical, and grouped according to what type of writing they are and within which part of the Bible. And so on page 50, you have the Baal cycle. This is taken from Coogan's translation, Stories from Ancient Canaan. So there's a short introduction to the text and then a translation of the text itself in the poetic lines that it's written in. Then another format available is Pritchard's translations. This is the illustrated version, the Ancient Near East Volume 1, Anthology of Text and Pictures. And so this one has, like, for instance, a map of the ancient Near East at the beginning, and then it has the texts themselves, and then at the back, it has a number of actual either inscriptions or photographs or illustrations of various ancient Near East texts, figures, carvings. And the Baal cycle in this one begins on page 92. A little more technical introduction. It tells you where you can find it in Anet, ancient Near East text. And that's a bigger volume that contains this translation as well. It's just in a hardback, like a larger format, more expensive. And then you have the translation done, and this one's by Ginsberg, of the Baal cycle. It preserves the poetic lines, and where there are breaks in the text, like where the tablet itself is damaged, and they have just having to guess or conjecture at what the original wording was, it notes that. Sometimes it'll say, 2 lines, defective and unintelligible. And then it also, in the margins, it notes Old Testament parallels to some of these passages, as well as if there's an illustration in the back, like this will say, see figure 126 for this throne and footstool image. So you turn in the back, figure 126, and there is the God resting on the throne and footstool. So if you're looking for like actual print editions of some of these ancient texts, then these would be the way to go. Now, we're actually going to be reading from the Context of Scripture edition, and I don't have those printed out. I have them digitally in my Concordance library, so that's what we're going to be using on screen. But the translation is done by Dennis Pardee, and those are available in print as well. They're just a little more expensive, and I don't have a copy here on the shelf. But the beauty of having it as in accordance is we can pull up the biblical parallels right beside certain passages where the biblical authors use images or motifs from the Baal cycle. So that's what we're going to do as we walk through this ancient Ugaritic story. Now, let me say right off the bat, because I already know I get crazy commenters and people that are way superstitious. I mean, some people think that children's toys are idols and images, so they're going to flip their lid if we're actually reading a pagan work. So let me just say this. The purpose of this is not to worship Baal. It's not to get people to think that the biblical authors copied scripture and made up stories and just adapted myths of Baal. It's none of that. This is just to show you these are the stories that Israel's neighbors were telling. And these are the stories against which God inspired scripture to be written to speak the truth into this world. God always accommodates culture in different ways. And we see in the Old Testament numerous ways that he accommodates himself to the peoples of the ancient world in order to, just like Paul did at Mars Hill with the monument to the unknown God, in order to take something that they have gotten wrong, but was on the right track, shall we say, and point them towards the reality, the greater reality, the C.S. Lewis would say, the true myth. In this case, it's the God of Israel, not Baal and the pantheon of the Canaanites. So let's jump in and actually look at the Baal myth. Now, before we get started, I've put together a little who's who in the Baal myth. This is the cast of characters. This is just so you know when these names pop up. First, we have El. And in context of scripture, which is the translation we're going to be using, it's spelled phonetically as Ilu. So when you see Ilu on the screen, that is El, the high god of the Canaanite pantheon. Now, for the Canaanites, El was the creator god. He's sometimes referred to as the bull, like his nickname. He's called the Lord of gods. He's Baal's father, although there's some question about that. Some think that he may not be Baal's father, that he may be a more distant relation somehow. The relationships among the Canaanite gods is not always nailed down, kind of like Greco-Roman gods. There's different traditions. But El lives in a tent on Mount Lalu. And Mount Lalu is believed to be the source of what's called the Double River and the upsprings of the deep. And on this mountain of God, this mountain of El, he oversees an assembly, a moed, a gathering, an assembly, which is the same Hebrew word used for congregation of Israel, but he oversees an assembly of the gods. If you're a fan of the work of Dr. Michael Heiser, you would recognize this as a biblical concept, the divine council. So this is El, who we're going to meet. He's the head god. Baal's not the head creator god. El is the creator god. He's sort of the old, kind of like, think of him as more of a grandfatherly figure. Then we have El's wife, Asherah. Now, in context of scripture, her name is spelled Atiratu. So I may just refer to her as Asherah whenever we're reading it, because Atiratu is a little bit more tricky to say. But she's his wife. She's the queen mother of the gods, and she's in some way associated with the sea. Now, she's not the chaos serpent. We'll meet them in a bit, but she strides across the sea. She comes from the sea. If El is associated with the mountains, Asherah is associated with the sea. Then we have Baal, or as it's spelled in COS, Balu. And Baal's title is the Cloud Rider. He is the storm god. He has another name, which is Hadad. And the word Baal just means like Lord or master. He's the storm god. He's the primary god. He's not the creator god, but he is the main one that's worshipped, kind of like Marduk was worshipped as the main god over in Babylon. And Baal lives on Mount Zaphanu. And in the Bible, this mountain is called Mount Zaphon, Zaphon. So that's where Baal has his palace on Mount Zaphanu, just like El has his on Mount Lalu. Then we're going to meet Anath, or spelled Anatu. And Anath is Baal's, it's uncertain if she's his sister or his lover. And given Canaanite sexual practices, probably could have been both. But she's a warrior goddess, incredibly violent. And she lives on a mountain of her own, Mount Inbubu. Then the enemies of Baal and Anat. The first one we're going to meet is Yam, or sometimes spelled Yamu. And one of his titles is ruler Naharu. And Nahar is just the word for river. So you could say like river boss or river king, something like that. But Yam is a serpent god of the sea. He is like the chaos serpent, Leviathan or Lotan, Python in the Greek myths. He is the chaos dragon, and he's Baal's rival at the beginning of this story. Now, Yam is the Hebrew word for sea. Every time you see the word sea in the Hebrew Bible, S-E-A, that's the word Yam. And then along with Yam, the chaos dragon of the sea, we have Mot or Motu. And Mot is the god of death. And in Hebrew, the word death is Mot. This is just the word for death or dead in Hebrew. Mot's the god of death. And he is described as El's son or beloved of El. So Mot is the son of El. Baal is possibly the son of El. Some have suggested that Baal is sort of the rival, that Mot is like the older brother, and he's the one who's called the beloved of El. So the conflict is going to be also between Baal and Mot. And then there are a few lesser characters in the story. There's Kothar, his full name, Kotaru wa Hasishu, and he's like the craftsman god. He's the artificer. He's the god that makes stuff. He builds the gods' temples and he makes their weapons. He's believed to dwell down in Memphis, down in Egypt. This would be something like in the Roman mythology, Vulcan. You know, the god who lives under the volcano and, you know, the iron worker with the furnaces and creates the weaponry and things like that. Then you have Shapsu or Shapesh. And Shapsu is the sun goddess. She's referred to as the torch or the luminary of the gods. And she'll play a part at the end of the cycle, sort of a peacemaker. And then at last you have Athtar or Ataru. And Athtar is he's an ally of Baal. He's kind of like Baal's stooge. He's known as the tyrant or the terrible. He's an ally of Baal, but he doesn't have the qualities that Baal has in the story. He's not that mighty. He's like a would-be usurper of Baal's place. After Baal dies, Athtar is going to attempt to take his place, but he's going to be cast down. He's going to be this would-be usurper. And if you've seen our video here in our Superhero Seminary playlist where Professor Daredevil talks about the name of Lucifer and where that came from and is Satan being described in the Old Testament, this figure is prominent in that video. Okay, so with all of that in mind, let's actually look at the Baal myth. And this is in context of scripture. This is volume 1, number 86. So the story begins by El, which is always spelled Ilu in this translation. El sends messengers to Anath. And so he says, say to the girl Anath, repeat to the sister-in-law of Limu. And there's some conjecture about who Limu actually is, but this is parallel poetry. This whole thing is in poetry. So there'll be a lot of repetition and the one will kind of shed light on the other. So this is the message. Message of the bull, your father El. Word of the gracious one, your sire. Present bread offerings in the earth, place love offerings in the dust, pour well-being out into the earth, calmness onto the fields. Hurry, press, hasten to me. Let your feet run to me. Let your legs hasten to Mount, and then it's not exactly sure what it is, so they just have Mount X. And then the text is broken here. Again, these are fragments, so we don't have the full account. So the envoys go to Anath and they deliver the message. It says they head off to Inbubu through 1,000 courts, 10,000. At the feet of Anat, they bow and fall, do homage and honor her. They raise their voices and say aloud, and then they repeat the message. Message of the bull, your father Ilu. Word of the gracious one, your sire. Present bread offerings in the earth, place love offerings in the dust, pour well-being out into the earth, calmness into the fields. Hurry, press, hasten to me. Let your feet run to me. Let your legs hasten to Mount X. So what's happening in this is El is sending messengers to tell Anath, hey, come to this feast that we're having. Bring your sacrifices. You know, sacrifices in the ancient world were how the gods ate. So El is going to throw a party, and he's inviting Anath to come and to bring her worship. And then he's going to send for Kotharu as well. It says, then they head off to Memphis, to the god of it all, to Crete, which is the throne on which he sits, to Memphis, which is the land of his own possession. Through 1,000 yards, 10,000 furlongs, at the feet of Kotharu they bow and fall. They do homage and honor him. They say to Kotharu, repeat to Hayinu, the handicrafter. And this is another name, possibly an Arabic cognate to Kotharu, that means like one who makes things by hand. So the message to Kotharu, just like the message to Anat, message of the bull, your father Ilu, word of the gracious one. Hurry, press, hasten to me, let your feet run. To me, let your legs hasten to Mount, the mountain of, and then they just have KS, which are like the letters in Ugaritic. Don't know exactly what this is referring to. For I have something to tell you, a matter to recount to you. words regarding wood, whisperings regarding stone, conversing's of heaven with earth, of the deep with the stars, a matter which men cannot know, which the hordes of the earth cannot understand. Come and I will explain it for you on Mount X. So he's saying, not just come to my festival, but also come, I'm going to impart some secret wisdom to you. I've got something to tell you, a deep mystery to utter. So you come and I'll let you know what it is. And so Kotharu responds, come, attendants of the gods. You may tarry, but I'm off. From Crete, from the most distance of gods, from Memphis, for the most distance of deities, by double stretches below the springs of the earth, triple lengths in the low places. So off he heads towards the gracious one, the kindly God, to mount the mountain of KS. He penetrates El's abode, enters the dwelling of the king, father of Shunama. And this is also another deity whose name we don't exactly know. At El's feet he bows and falls. He does homage and honors him, the bull El. And the tablet's broken here. So there's feasting and the tablet's broken, so we don't exactly know what all is happening. But on the second tablet, tablet 2, now we get a message from Yam, the god of the sea, the chaos serpent. Yam sends messengers. Ruler Naharu sends an embassy. They rejoice. Go, lads, don't dally. Head for the great assembly, for Mount Lalu. At the feet of El, do not fall. Do not prostrate yourself to the great assembly. Standing, say your speech. Repeat your information. So now Yam has sent in his messengers to go to this assembly, but do not fall down before El. Don't prostrate yourself. Give him this message. And here's the message that Yam sends to this divine council meeting on El's holy mountain. Say to the bull, my father El, repeat to the great assembly. Message of Yam, your master, of your lord, ruler Naharu. Give up, O gods, the one whom you obey, the one whom the hordes of the earth fear. Give up Baal and his attendants. Give up the son of Dagon, that I might take possession of his gold. And son of Dagon is another title. This lets us know that Baal might not actually be the son of El, but rather the son of the grain god, the harvest god, Dagon. And Dagon appears, the Philistines worship Dagon. He appears in the book of Judges and Samuel. So Yam sends a message, hey, you guys are all at this party. I want Baal. Bring him to me. I want what he has. I want to take possession of his gold. So the lads head off. Don't hesitate. They head for Mount Lalu for the great assembly. The gods have sat down to eat. The sons of the Holy One to dine. Baal attending on El. The gods see them. See Yam's messenger, the embassy of ruler Naharu. The gods lower their heads onto their knees and onto their princely thrones. So the gods are a little bit scared. Nobody wants to look up. Like, this is super awkward. But Baal rebukes them. Why, gods, have you lowered your heads, even to your knees, even to your princely thrones? As one must the gods answer, the tablet of Yam's messengers, the embassy of ruler Naharu. Like, we got to stand up and stick together as one. Lift, O gods, your heads, off your knees, off your princely thrones. Let me answer Yam's messengers, the embassy of ruler Naharu. The gods then raise their heads off their knees, off their princely thrones. So Baal's like, I'm going to speak up. And now some of these are stock phrases we see in scripture, like this, lift, O gods, your heads, off your knees, off your princely thrones. This is picked up in Psalm 24 in verse 7. Lift up your heads, you gates. And gates were like the city gates, or possibly the people who sat at the city gates, like I think it's called metonymy, where you, like when we say the White House said such and such, we don't mean the House said it, we mean the president said such and such. And that could be what's going on here. Lift up your heads, you gates. Be lifted up, you ancient doors, that the King of Glory may come in. So there's some phrases in Hebrew poetry in the Bible when officials are being spoken to. In the Baal saga, he's talking to the other gods, the divine council, the rulers in the heavens on Mount Lalu. In the Psalm, it's applying that language to the gates of Jerusalem because God, the King of Glory, is coming in. So back to the scene. Thereafter, the messengers of Yam arrive, the embassy of river Naharu. At the feet of El, they do not fall. They do not prostrate themselves to the great assembly. Standing, they say their speech, repeat their information. They look like a fire, two fires, their tongue like a sharpened sword. And this is language also picked up in the Psalms. Psalm 64:3, for example, talking about evildoers or people that are malicious. It says they sharpen their tongues like swords and aim cruel words like deadly arrows. So this is a figure of speech in ancient Canaanite language, sharpen the tongue like a sword, to speak against someone. And they say to the bull, his father El, Message of Yam, your master, of your Lord, river Naharu. Give up, O gods, the one whom you obey, the one whom the hordes of the earth fear. Give up Baal and his attendants. Give up the son of Dagon, that I might take possession of his gold. So then El replies, and look what El says. The bull, his father El, replies, Baal is your servant, O Yam. Baal is your servant, O Naharu. Son of Dagon is your prisoner. He will indeed bring you tribute. Like one of the gods, he will bring you a gift. Like one of the sons of the Holy One, he will bring you presents. So El is just placating, like, all right, he's all yours. And then, of course, Baal is not happy with this. Then Prince Baal is sick with rage. Moreover, he takes in his hand a striking weapon, in his right hand a smiting weapon. The lads he strikes. So he starts beating on the messengers. Now, Anath grabs his right hand. Athtar grasps his left hand. How could you smite Yam's messengers, the embassy of ruler Naharu? Like, you don't strike the messengers in the ancient world. This is why if you saw the movie 300, remember when the messengers come and King Leonidas is just like, this is Sparta, and he kicks him into the hole. Like, that was an act of war. The messengers of an embassy, someone who bringing the message from another ruler, were considered sacrosanct. You were not to attack them. But Baal does what he wants. Then Prince Baal is again sick with rage. To the field of a man, Yam's messengers, the embassy of river Naharu. And the text is kind of garbled here. Don't really know what this means, to the field of a man, this term. And then some of Baal's response is missing, but he says, I, for my part, hereby say to Yam, your master, to your lord, ruler Naharu, the word of Hadu, the avenger. And Hadad is most likely Baal's actual name. Just like God's actual name is Yahweh, Baal's actual name, because Baal just, again, it means Lord or master, but Hadad or Hadu is probably his actual name. It's the name of the storm god. So at this point, somebody sends Kothar to El, and Kothar, it looks like he wasn't at the banquet yet, or possibly these tablets are out of order. Again, this is not a super well preserved text, but it says, from Crete to the most distant of gods, from Memphis to the most distant of deities, by double stretches below the springs of the earth, triple links in the low places. And this is a standard poetic way of describing the distance that the gods are traveling to get to each other. So off he heads to El at the source of the double river, mist the uprisings of the deeps. He enters El's dwelling, goes into the home of the king, father of Shinama. At El's feet he bows and falls, does homage and honors him. And Shinama is another god who we don't really know who that's referring to, at least I don't. But now this is interesting imagery, is El's temple on his mountain is seen as the source of the double river and the uprisings of the deeps. And this is the word in Ugaritic related to the word tehom in Hebrew, the word for abyss or the deep. And so his home is seen as being in the midst of the deep, the source of the double rivers. So this imagery of the home of the gods being the source of water, source of the springs, source of the rivers. I mean, obviously that brings to mind concepts from the Garden of Eden, the river that run and then split into four and the four headwaters. But there's also prophetic imagery, like in Ezekiel 47, in his vision of the temple. The man brings Ezekiel to the temple, and I saw water coming out from under the threshold of the temple towards the east, for the temple faced east. And water was coming down from under the south side of the temple, south of the altar. So you got in Ezekiel's vision of the temple, this heavenly renewed temple that Ezekiel's seeing in his apocalyptic section of his prophecy, you have two rivers or two sources of water coming out of the temple. You see it in Zechariah 14. On that day, living water will flow out from Jerusalem. Half of it east to the Dead Sea, half of it west to the Mediterranean Sea in summer and in winter. Again, two sources of water flowing out of Jerusalem, which is the home of God, the temple itself. And then you see it in Joel chapter 3. In that day, the mountains will drip with new wine and the hills will flow with milk. All the ravines of Judah will run with water. A fountain will flow out of the Lord's house and will water the valley of acacias. So this is stock imagery from the ancient world. And so where the creator God is seen as the source of the waters. So rather than just talking about some weird hydraulic geographical detail, these prophetic passages that talk about that are really calling to mind God is the true high God. God is the true creator God. Yahweh is the one who dwells on his holy mountain. And his holy mountain, it's not far away on Mount Lalu. It's not on Mount Zaphon, it's on Zion. It's here amidst his people. So then for some reason in the Baal myth, El commands Kothar, the craftsman, to build Yam a house. Thereafter, the bull of his father El responds, Kothar, be off, go build a house for Yam, raise a palace for river Naharu. Be off, Kothar, you are to go build a house for Prince Yam, you're to raise a palace for river Naharu. Hurry, build the house, hurry, raise the palace, a house covering 1,000 acres, a palace covering 10,000 hectares. So whether El is doing this to appease Yam so that he will back down and not demand Baal, or whether he's doing it as a tribute to Yam because he's just sort of a weak grandfatherly figure and Yam is the mighty chaos serpent. The sense is that the gods, all the gods except for Baal, fear Yam. They fear the chaos serpent and El among them. And of course, this sheds light on the Old Testament where God, Yahweh himself, speaks and the deep obeys. The waters are split in two. I mean, there's all kinds of imagery here where Yahweh has no fear whatsoever of any elements of creation. So then there's a back and forth between Athtar and Yam, and Athtar also kind of whines. He's like, I want a house too. And Shapsu tries to calm him down and just be like, hey, know your place. She says, the bull, your father El, surely he would pull up the foundations of your seat, overturn the throne of your kingship, break the staff of your rulership. So then I don't really know exactly what goes on with Athtar and Yam and El. But then at some point after this, Baal responds and he says, I will indeed force them to leave. Moreover, I will drive out, and in Yam I will indeed destroy the resting place. In Yam, at his very heart, I will destroy the... And then the text is broken. As for ruler Naharu, I will destroy his neck. There with the sword I will lay waste. I will assault his house. The powerful one will fall to the earth, the mighty one to the dust. And again, Yam is the word for sea. So Baal going into his very heart is, the storm god going into the heart of the sea. Storm versus sea is sort of the conflict in the ancient world. So Baal says he's going to kill Yam. Yam responds, hardly has the word left his mouth, the utterance his lips, when his voice is heard. There is a cry from under the throne of Prince Yam. And this is most likely a cry, like a cry of laughter or some kind of response, because Yam is not remotely scared of Baal. So then Kothar fashions weapons for Baal to use in his battle against Yam. Kothar speaks up. I hereby announce to you, Prince Baal, and I repeat, Cloud Rider. So this is one of Baal's most favored titles, is Cloud Rider, one who rides on the clouds. And this also explains why the psalmist used that to refer not to Baal, but to Yahweh. Psalm 68:4, sing to God, sing in praise of his name, extol him who rides on the clouds, rejoice before him. His name is Yahweh, not Baal. So Kothar goes on, as for your enemy, O Baal, as for your enemy, you'll smite him. You'll destroy your adversary. You'll take your eternal kingship, your sovereignty that endures from generation to generation. Again, this should sound biblical. Psalm 145, your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. Your dominion endures through all generations. Yahweh is trustworthy in all he promises and faithful in all he does. So I'm hoping that by reading this Ugaritic tale, you're starting to see the phrases, the imagery, the concepts that Israel uses, but applies them to Yahweh as a polemic against the Canaanite neighbors that worship Baal and El and all of these other gods.